Stephen Morris, aka Mozza. He was a policeman. Now he's a full-time professional poker player. Very good friend of mine, and he's had a very large impact on my life. I hope you enjoy this podcast and take something from it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Hi guys, Elliott here. Very excited to announce my first podcast with a professional poker player, Steve Morris. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. How are you, bruv?
All good, all good. I guess before we start, I just want to say, obviously, thank you for coming on. We've been talking about doing this for a long time now, but yeah, we finally made it happen. So it's good to see.
Yeah, mate. It's one of those things which um, we talked about. I think from Vegas, right? We talked
Yeah,
about doing it. So yeah, this is my first podcast as well. So we'll see what happens, mate. It should be
yeah,
good fun.
exactly. And now, obviously, like in terms of what we're going to talk about today, like there are lots of different things. So, like the real purpose of my channel is to get people to think about perhaps like thinking about alternative ways to live. So that might mean not working a 9 to 5. That might be, anything really, like anything that's like not super conventional. And for me, you're sort of a really good personification of that. Your story around all of that's good. Obviously, you worked in the police, which we're going to talk about in more depth. And then on the other side, we could have gone down the more poker heavy route, talking about poker, what's going on in poker. But
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
we'll both find more interesting, maybe, yeah, this whole idea of leaving a normal life behind and pursuing something that's a bit more sort of out there.
yeah. I mean, it's. I'd say we're quite similar like that. That's probably why we probably got on pretty well. Is because obviously you had obviously a very successful job. I had a career in the police, which I kind of left on a career break, which is coming to an end. So there's a decision on that to be made over the next couple of years. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think since leaving that, I think I'm a pretty big believer now in that. Yes, we're very lucky that we have a means of income and a means to where a way of living outside of like conventional life, right? But that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that everybody can't have that similar kind of thought process. And I think so many people live kind of scared on that. So obviously that will come up kind of through kind of this podcast to guess what our thoughts are on that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, so in terms of sort of playing poker, I guess my first question would be, um, what drove you to get into it? Were there factors on where you grew up, on how you grew up, that fed into that? Yeah, how did that decision really come about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me it was always I would have always regretted it eventually if I never like made an effort of doing it for a living kind of thing. So like my kind of background from like I started playing when I was like 19 or 18, 19 properly, saying walking in a casino. 32 now, so it's been quite a while. But for so long, I played tournaments.
Yeah,
I was with like a staking company called Bankroll Supply. It was pretty sick, really. Had like some pretty sick deals on that, and I managed to get like kind of like enough capital behind me to eventually be able to make that leap. But it was kind of weird because at the time, like my parents didn't really kind of like know about poker, like really agree with poker. And I don't know if you have the same experience, but like they always have this kind of like thought that they always know someone that's almost killed themselves from poker or almost killed themselves from gambling, right? Like there's
yeah,
never like a positive story with gambling, so they always
yeah,
think it's the worst. So I'll never forget my first trip to Vegas. Was that I told them that I want a satellite. I was like, I want our
yeah,
$10,000 satellite, but really I just saved up on the side for it. So um, kind of going to Vegas and kind of seeing kind of that was kind of the first kind of like taste of it. And then eventually, I just decided to transition to cash because I didn't think I ever wanted to do it from a tournament perspective because the variance is just ridiculous. I think I saw a tweet the other day, one of the cash tables, when he talked about dark times and a 30 buying downswing. And for a cash player, a 30 buying downswing is pretty big, right?
yeah.
But like in tournament perspective, like all the tournament players on there are like, oh my God, 30 buy-ins. Like, that's not that dark.
Nothing.
So I would never ever wanted to be a tournament player professionally. So yeah, so I met Ginge Poker, Richard Schiels. So I met Rich through um, I think it was a trip in Ireland, to be fair. And him and his brother Brandon was kind of big in the and kind of changing my mindset around work because I remember like sitting and talking and being like, oh, I can never leave work because the pension's too good. And like they kind of were really kind of like a big part of like changing my thought process around that. Like because pension, yeah, it's great, but it's great in 30 or 40 years time when you're probably you're not at the worst part of the time of your life, but like your best years are now. So like they kind of changed that kind of thought process, and then I decided, I can't even remember what year it is now. I feel like it's January 2018. I transitioned to cash, and I decided to leave. I decided to finally put my application in for the career break when I satellited to a big tournament on a Sunday. And I remember going into work at like 7 a.m., had like a big job at work and didn't get off work till like 10 p.m. So like worked this massive shift. It auto-regged me into the tournament. So like I was just blinding out at home and I was really annoyed because obviously it was like a big tournament.
Yeah.
I then go home at like 10 o'clock and like I'm still in the tournament because it's deep structured. And I think it started like 8. And I basically ended up like not going to sleep till like 5 a.m. And like finishing third or fourth and making like 25K or something in it.
Wow, yeah.
And at that point I was like, what's the point in work? Like, why am I doing it? Am I doing it because I enjoy helping people? Am I doing it for money? Like, and everyone's drive's different. But at that point, I kind of was like, look, like, I'll never forgive myself if I don't do it. So, yeah. So then I decided to apply for a career break, and then 6 months later, I was kind of like, that's that. And then we started playing cash, really, mate.
Interesting. So it sounds like, in terms of the main things that sort of helped you make your decision, it was sort of meeting the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
You had a bit of short-term success, which always helps, I think, when you're deciding to pursue poker professionally. And it sounded like it's just the right time. It sounds like inside you felt like there's something a bit more out there than just sort of working for the pension in 40 years' time.
Well, it's weird because I did really well in a tournament series, and then I had enough money to buy a house, which in my mind at the time was like, oh my God, like work, house, family, kids, like all these kind of things. I'm still a big believer at that. I still think that's good. But like, I then bought a house. And then after buying the house, I was like so unhappy because then I had no money. Like, and I had no money to then live. So then in the end, what I was doing, I was basically going to work 7 a.m., coming home, whatever time I would get off. And then I was just sat in the house. Like, and then I was like, is this what I really want kind of thing? So yeah, so I was pretty lucky with like the network. I've always been lucky with networking. I've always been able to like kind of like meet people and kind of like be kind of really blessed with the circle of people I had around me and take like little pockets of information here and there.
Yeah.
So at that time, like being able to just speak to people who, firstly, my biggest fear was around kind of parents, like what would they think? Like I would say my mom and dad are super successful. And me being able to go to them and just being like, look, I'm going to take a career break from work because I want to travel and I want to play poker. Like being able to get to that point was kind of super difficult because, and I still think a lot of people probably have that perception anyway. So they could be in like a pretty comfortable job at home and then say they get offered to move abroad somewhere for a job. The first thing they think is like, oh, what about other people? Like they never put themselves first, you know what I mean? And like it comes to a point where there has to be balance with that because like you're creating your own path, you're creating your own life, right? It's not about like your parents and stuff. Obviously you want to make them proud, and that's I think is a son or daughter's goal, but it shouldn't be kind of like something that holds you back at the same time. So like my biggest fear of probably going for that career break was kind of like that was me kind of saying to them, I'm going to try and be a professional poker player and hope that they don't look at me like I'm an absolute psychopath.
Yeah. It's super interesting because it's not like you're leaving your job in the police to go and just move your career in a different direction. Like you're going to go and work in sales, something like that. It's like, well, at least in their eyes, it's like, okay, you're going to leave this super stable job, which the police is, and go into like just a world of chaos and gambling and degeneracy is how they see it, right?
Well, they never see the strategy behind it, right? And like, don't get me wrong, like poker, there's a massive element of luck and there's a massive element of variance, but like it is essentially like a game of chess, right? And you can kind of study it, you can kind of learn it, and that's why people make money at it, and that's why people are professionals, and that's why recreationals come back because they can also win. Okay.
Yeah.
But if I told my parents that, I've learned chess, I'm a grandmaster, and I'm now going to go and play chess, like, which is essentially like a similar kind of like skill, or like say I'm left to do trading. Because I think a lot of people kind of cross over trading and poker quite closely. Like I haven't done it personally, but say if I said something like that, I think I would have been way more kind of open to it. But trading is essentially the same as gambling, right? Like you're just hedging bets, right? I would assume. I don't know enough into it to kind of say. So I think for them hearing the word poker, it's like a trigger word, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh my God, poker, it's gambling. That they just see poker gambling. They just put the two together. They never ever kind of like separate it, if that makes sense, which I think is always difficult when kind of people trying to consider making that leap kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, like in terms of trying to explain it to my friends and family, I'm actually at the point where I just don't even bother, you know, because I know in their heads they'll always think, and like it is gambling, but it's not. I always say, but it's not the same as putting it all on black on the roulette table. Do you know what I
No,
mean?
yeah,
It's
exactly.
something completely different. But
But
one
like,
thing, go on,
go on,
Moz.
sorry. No, carry on, carry on.
One thing I wanted to mention was, so you're speaking about this idea of variance. Now, for people who are watching this who might not be poker players or know too much about poker, could you just sort of briefly explain what variance actually is and how critical that piece is in a professional poker player's life?
Yeah, so like there's things that are like downswings and upswings, right? And you can play poker, you can be a winning poker player, but like obviously luck is involved and percentages are involved, so you can get certain hands in and certain. So like, I mean, how can you describe it? You can get certain hands in against other hands, and you have like what equity, say 60% equity versus 40% equity. So you're going to lose this hand 40% of the time, and that's the variance side of poker. And like, there's also kind of other spots where like you have like good hand into good hand, and like you just lose unfortunately. And then you have like and you would call that kind of a cooler, where you just kind of getting set up and you're always kind of going to lose money or win money in that spot. But like where we make our most money is when like you're getting good hand into like slightly better hand or worse hand, a bad hand into bad hand, and like that's where you're making your little money. Where like in the smaller pots, and I suppose that's kind of what people don't see too much. And like it's kind of funny. Like the only kind of experience I can kind of liken it to is when I went to the Caribbean with my parents for my 21st, and they had like a casino on site, and like the way kind of I joke and call them muggles. So like people who don't play poker, I call them muggles. Like not in like a derogatory term or anything like that. It's just like they're very conform to the way they want to live and stuff. And my dad's walking around the casino. My dad's like, oh, look at those over there, like table ringers. Like they sit there all night and they just wait to take your money. That's the way they describe it. And it's quite funny because like at this point, I've already been playing poker for 3 or 4 years and stuff. And the reason I got into poker was my actual parents. Like when I was like 15, 16, they actually taught me how to play. So it's kind of ironic that then I've come to a path where like I now want to play it professionally. And at the time of telling them that, I wouldn't say it wasn't supportive, but they were just very hesitant. And I think it's because the way they would describe variance is gambling. If that makes sense. They just see variance as a gamble. So once you put an element of luck into something, like they call it gambling, whereas I would say poker players call it variance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's super interesting, man. Super interesting because I think even in life, right? So let's say that so just before this call, we were talking about the housing market, right? And buying a house. So you could say, so you've worked up, you've saved up X amount to buy a house, which is all like theoretically correct. Next year, there could be a housing market crash. There could be a war, like just somebody could crash into your house. There could be something that happens, which is just bad luck. You've done everything right. You've made every correct move, but you know something could just happen that just really messes you up, really messes your life up, which you can't really account for. So that's how I kind of see it. But people wouldn't call buying a house gambling. They say it's the opposite of gambling, which is super interesting.
Yeah. And it's the same thing because actually something kind of happened to me personally. So when I was buying my house, I spoke to my mortgage broker and kind of got everything kind of laid out. And I was told that I needed X deposit for this. So we're going through, we're nearly at completion. And then kind of the moment like the mortgage is about to be kind of granted from the bank, they're like, oh no, we've actually made a mistake looking at your wage slips. Like we actually need like 25% more.
Yeah.
And obviously now I'm at the point, this is before like I even considered leaving work. So this was at the point where like house is everything to me. So in the end, my dad actually borrowed me some money. But like that's variance, right? That's just variance. Like I've come to a point where like I had everything in place. I picked the house that was a dream house for me at the time as a first house. And then right at the last hurdle, like somebody said, oh no, you can't have that. And it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was kind of my experience where I could probably liken that the kind of same in terms of housing market. But I think for so long I thought I regretted buying the house, but I think actually at the moment, obviously, with the way housing markets and stuff are good, like obviously interest rates are going bad, but it is just a good investment kind of long term, isn't it? I guess, but
Yeah.
which is probably why my dad borrowed me money. But if I said to my dad, "Oh, like I'm on a massive downswing at 500 Zoom or 200 Zoom at line, or they're playing in Vegas, like can I borrow $5,000 or borrow 10 grand?"
It's a
He'd be
bit
like,
different.
"Nope, yeah, nope." Like, so it's very, very different, isn't it? But it's the same concept, right? But it's the fact that, like, in their mind, the house gives it structure, and the house is always going to be investment. Like, they probably don't. It's very hard for a professional poker player to explain that they are an investment to a muggle, kind of, you know what I mean? They just wouldn't understand it. Like, some of my friends want to do it and like they want to do it for fun, but I don't really let my friends buy any action in me ever, because like expectations can be different. Like, you know what I mean? So
Yeah. Exactly. So you've left the police. You've taken your career break. You've got your
yep,
house. You've got this expectation that probably, I'm going to assume, you're going to make loads of money. I think it's going to be pretty easy. You know, you'll pick a couple of tournaments, you go to Vegas. Expectation versus reality. Let's talk about that. And I know you had some difficulties, you know, which we can get into as
yeah,
well. So yeah, let's expectation versus reality. Let's go.
yeah. I mean, so I think basically I gave myself 6 months as cash player before actually leaving work. And I grinded from like I think 25 to 100 Zoom pretty quickly. It was like small sample, like sub 200k sample or 250k hand sample.
Yeah.
But like at every stake, I was winning at a decent win rate. And this was like 4 years ago, so I'd say the games were considerably better than what they are now. It's probably longer than that. And actually, it might be. Well, I would have been 5 years. April is when I left, actually. So yeah, so it's like 4.5 years ago. So the games were obviously considerably better. So like once I had that kind of confirmation that I could beat cash, because at the time, like I was always aware that cash was way harder. And it was funny at the time when I was playing tournaments online. I was streaming on Twitch a little bit. So like Brandon and Rich was watching me, and Rich was kind of like, you kind of have no idea with bet size and stuff like that, which is probably correct at the time. Like I would always describe myself as a good recreational back in the day. Like I've always been like the intuitive kind of player, like that Phil kind of player. And then kind of like once transitioning to cash, like I realized that you couldn't get away with like everything. But it was quite funny because I remember like the first 3-4 months of playing cash, if I ever had like a marginal hand that I could justify doing something with, I would just always go all in, just all the time. Like, so it's quite funny in terms of like probably having like the reality probably was probably skewed a little bit at the time because obviously hand sample was so small. But yeah, then I went to Vegas and LA in that summer, like so 6 months later, which was pretty cool. Had like a pretty nice trip playing like 5-10. But again,
which year is this? Which year is this?
This was 6 months after, so like it's going to be 2018. So 2018, summer 2018. So I left in the April, and then the summer of 2018, like I went to Vegas. It's still like my second or third trip because I've been there a few times before playing tournaments.
Yep.
But went there, played cash, had a pretty successful trip there, which was pretty nice. And then basically at the end of that, I was basically at the end of like a CFP agreement because originally I had a CFP agreement with Rich. Probably my biggest mistake. I don't want to call it a mistake because I think everything happens for a reason. But one thing I would probably say to any poker players that are watching this is that don't be afraid to take risk. So I left work in the April and I could afford to basically pay for coaching and stake myself at 100, 200 Zoom, for instance. But instead I decided to take the CFP route because it meant that I didn't kind of like have the worry of my parents worrying about it. So I was still kind of like subconsciously living through kind of like what they would expect rather than taking the risk myself. And then basically I did decent in Vegas and I then had enough to basically play 100 Zoom and 200 Zoom online. And then with the aim to then go back to America kind of a couple of months later. But then I made a mistake in Bali where I think GG 200 looked pretty good. And I was like, I messaged Rich again. I was like, right, do you want to buy some action or do you want to stake? And then ran bad in a few of the spots, and then all of a sudden I'm back on stake again. So like what I would say to any kind of poker players watching this is that don't be afraid to take risks and don't be afraid to be aggressive with that because that's what it's there for, right? That's what you're leaving work for. That's what you're kind of like branching out into this. Like if you have the money to buy coaching separately, then you should always have 100% of yourself. if you can, because you're investing in yourself, which is the biggest investment, right? And if you're a winning poker player, then you should always invest in yourself first. So I'd say that was probably one of the biggest mistakes in terms of like a reality mistake that I made. Like, but again, I was still living on the expectation of my parents, I guess. So yeah, so then that was fine in terms of Bali. And then 2019 in January, I went to Aussie Millions, which was pretty cool. Played the main event out there, which was pretty cool. So still like to play tournaments a little bit on the side and stuff, but just kept it to like the main events and stuff and played cash. Cash was pretty good there. And then the plan was to go back to Thailand for like a couple of weeks in the February. And then basically go back to America. But then obviously COVID happened, or COVID was kind of like starting to happen at the end of that kind of trip to Aussie Millions. So we got, I would say, stuck. We were stuck in Thailand, so to speak, which was to the outside world. And obviously everybody who was living through COVID, like in England and obviously in other parts of the world, would look like an absolute paradise. But it was actually pretty tough for me personally because when I think it was like September time in that year, just made some bad life choices. Like we basically got involved with a private game, which essentially was scammed. Basically, it was basically like heads up, sit and goes, basically. And long story short, got scammed. I won't go too much into it, but in the terms of like going kind of like a big hole because of that, then that kind of like stagnated my kind of earnings, which was pretty weird for me because for so long I just thought I was never going to lose. Like I think from like leaving work up until like it was probably a 14, 15 month period. Like I didn't really have a losing month, which is pretty insane, really. And I'm not saying like I didn't run well in those spots and stuff. I was playing like soft live games as well as playing soft live games. I think the games were a lot easier than in the games that I was playing when I was playing 100 and 200 Zoom online. Plus, I was getting the rate back online as well, which was good. And like some months I was putting on pretty insane volume. But then when we was in Samui during the lockdown, like I shot up 500 for like the first time and realized kind of like the big gap between 200 and 500. Yeah. It's huge. It's like monumental gap. Wow. And then from there, that led to kind of like we found like a private game. Unfortunately, that became scammed, and then because of like loss of future earnings in terms of being in a hole and making that back, essentially went pretty much broke. Really, kind of like in that kind of 6-7 month period, which was pretty tough to kind of get your head around because again, we talk about kind of controllables and stuff. Like in my mind, I couldn't get around my head the fact that the reason why I'm in the position that I am is because of something I couldn't control and I was never going to win in that game. So it's not a skill thing. Which was kind of like really tough to deal with. So like, again, expectation versus reality. Like my expectation is that like, I'm going to win, I'm going to do really well. But then I've made one bad life choice. And then all of a sudden it can all unravel, it was pretty tough to deal with at the time, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And again, yeah, you have the expectation, like you said, everything's going to go smooth. And now suddenly you're in this reality where somebody's literally almost taking advantage. You know, there are people out there who are looking to scam you, who are looking to take your money unfairly. I can imagine that being pretty tough to digest at the time.
Yeah, I think it was the whole kind of like how can I say it? Like I think from the moment of like playing 200 to 500, like for me, I got pushed is the wrong word, but like I was getting pushed in terms of motivated and driven to play 500, right? Which is good. But like, I think at the time, like, I think I was so kind of like driven to try and do it and it was probably too soon for me. So then obviously in the space of kind of like 6 weeks, like you go on like a, say 15, 20K downswing online, which in terms of like cash is a lot of money, right? But in terms of buy-ins, it's like 30, 40 buy-ins, which when win rates are so small at 500 anyway, even if I was just a break-even / small winning player, like I'm still going to be going on those swings quite regularly anyway, just because the win rates are so small. Yeah. So from that perspective, that's I would kind of regretted kind of like taking that shot too early kind of thing. But then it's weird because if it goes the other way and you run well, then obviously your perception is kind of like completely the other way, right? So like I never like to think of that as kind of like a regret because I don't regret it. But then obviously that happened, and then after that happening, then this situation with the game where we got scammed happened, and then from that you kind of feel like everything's unraveling kind of thing. And then before you know it, you're kind of like questioning like what you really want, like have you made the right decision, like because like I'm living in Thailand at the moment, and I absolutely love the place to bits. But the whole point that like I move away from England and I live in kind of Asia is because I enjoy the lifestyle here. And essentially, what I was doing, I was basically like in Asia, and I was just getting by, kind of thing. And like it wasn't enjoyable in the slightest. You're also kind of like going over every scenario in your head of like what happened and kind of what you could have done differently. That and create self doubt. You then kind of like grinding your ass off. Excuse the phrase. You're grinding like really hard to basically like try and make the money back and stuff like that, which you were never going to win anyway. So like that kind of that in your head is tough anyway.
Yeah.
So you're grinding back in terms of that as well. So kind of getting your head around that, and then all you're doing it is essentially you're doing it to basically earn less than what you can still earn at home, because I still have a job at home. Like still at this point, like I'm still on a career break. So that runs out in April in the coming next year. So like in my head, I was kind of like, do I go home? And I was having this like massive battle with myself of like, what do I really want kind of thing. And that's kind of really tough. And I think for so long, kind of, I've been kind of like successful for like what felt like a long time, being 14 months, 15 months. Then all of a sudden it comes crashing down. And then your parents can tell you, they can just tell something's wrong. Yeah. And you're having to try and explain the situation to your parents and your sister and stuff. And then all of a sudden, like they're saying, you're living beyond your means, or you're failing, or you're this, like, it's like, come on, Steve, like time to come home now, mate. It hasn't worked. And obviously they want you home anyway, because from their perspective, they want to see you and stuff like that. So I understand that as well. So like having all this kind of going on at once was really tough. Really, really tough. But equally, I wouldn't change that experience for anything, to be honest with you. Because like the person I am now and the person I am today has probably been made from kind of like that kind of hardship, because I've never had it really. I've always kind of like been able to kind of like live within my means, like, and I never had any debt up until that kind of point. I had an overdraft at that point and stuff, but like I never had any debt, so I could always just buy what I wanted. And what it kind of taught me is that like money doesn't grow on trees, and there will be a point where like the time gets tough kind of thing, and you have to have plans for that, which I never ever lived like that. I never ever lived like that whatsoever. It's a stage when I was younger, basically, I used to send my savings to my dad, basically, for him to look after, because otherwise I would just spend the shit out of it. So like basically my savings for the house are basically grown from like me sending the money to my dad and just be like, Dad, look after this. Like if I asked for money, like he'd just send it to me. He'd never ask me any questions.
Yeah.
But like equally, that was a double-edged sword as well, because then the moment I leave the police, I'm like, oh, I should actually be staking myself and playing myself. And then I've got to ask my dad for all the money, and he's gonna be like, oh, why do you want to do this? Like I thought you. So like it's a double-edged sword as well, isn't it? So you do stuff like when you're back at home and like you live this normal life to kind of like set yourself up for the future. Then all of a sudden I decide that I want this new path. And then I'm like, oh my God, I had to tell my dad that I want all my money back. Really, really weird to deal with. Really weird to deal with. But yeah, I mean, that was a tough period kind of like a couple of years ago. But yeah, happens, so I guess.
What sort of, I guess, strategies, for want of a better word, did you put in place to get out of that? Because that kind of thing, you know, you have to give yourself some credit, because that can really mess people up. You know, these are things that people might not even recover from, you know, mentally, financially. So like what work did you put in? What strategies did you put in place to like grow out of that and sort of just get, you know, back on your feet?
I think I would say there's two things I remember, and I don't think if they well, one definitely would have helped. Well, no, both of them definitely helped. Sorry. So like the first one was like you'll know this guy called Josh Dana. Like he was like doing like performance coaching for Ginge Poker Academy at the time, which is basically how we met. And he essentially basically helped a lot. We were having, I think I might have had like 10 or 15 sessions with him, and like just kind of like trying to reframe the brain into like controllables and stuff. That kind of really helped at the time. But like one thing that I probably remember bigger than anything is that basically got to a point where I had to ask my parents to borrow me some money. Like it was like I think it was $1,500 or $2,000. And like without going into too much detail, like they basically was like, they were fine. But they basically made me feel like I was living behind my means and like it was time to come home kind of thing. Yeah, so like between kind of like...
Was this money to play poker with, or just
to live, okay, yeah, just to live basically, yeah, because I was still staked. This was just to live at the time. So like obviously asking them to borrow some money, and then essentially them saying you're failing. Whereas in my mind, I'm like, I've not failed. Like, I've made one bad life choice. It's not a skill thing. Like, when someone says that to me, like, it makes me really dig my feet. And I'm like, I get to the stage where I'm like, I'll prove you wrong. Like, I can be kind of like inherently quite lazy with study and poker at times. But like when somebody, and the same in work when I was in the police, but when somebody says you can't do something, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll show you I can. Like, I've always been like that. So I think that was probably the biggest moment in the fact of like me having to ask my parents to borrow some money in that kind of time of hardship. And then them giving me a tough time at the time, I was like, kind of resentful for it, but it probably actually was the most helpful thing because that kind of drove me to kind of the stage where I like, okay, yes, I have failed, but I failed because of bad life choice. So going forward, I'm not going to make those bad life choices. I'm going to try and limit them as much as possible, and I'm going to prove you wrong because I know I have a skill at this in this game, basically. Sure. So I'd say that was probably one of the biggest points, and Josh definitely helped at that time as well, I would say.
Okay, so basically, yeah, like through that turmoil, you've just experienced like massive growth essentially, as opposed to something that's messed you up.
Yeah, I mean, at the time you don't see it, but I think in the basically this was all kind of like the back end of what we're in 2022, right? So this was all the back end of 2020. Okay. And then 2020 in February 2021, then obviously we were in Thailand, so we found out we could get to America still. Pretty annoying that we didn't find this out beforehand because we could have actually got to America kind of like in the November time when the games were like 6 max, like insane. Like, yeah. So that was I know some friends that were playing like 6 max 10-20 with a $20 ante out there for like, they had it for like 3 months and it was just so juicy out there because like no European regs could go there whatsoever. So like it was just mainly like Americans because if you're from certain parts of the world, basically America banned you and the corridor to get there completely banned. But from Thailand, it wasn't. You just needed to test. You didn't even need to quarantine, which was absolutely sick. Wow. So we found out in the February that we could go there. We played, had a pretty successful trip. I mean, the level of the hole was kind of like, I think it was over 100K. The hole was from a mix of like me being on a downswing and a mix of kind of like being scammed. Yeah. Essentially made kind of like a decent chunk out of that. And that was with obviously expenses. And then obviously I did another trip for the World Series, which was pretty sick last year. But I had a new backer for that. So essentially kind of my backer basically sold the makeup to somebody. They sorted out a figure what they wanted. And then my new backer reduced the makeup to 40K, which was pretty nice. And then I think in World Series last year I made like around about 100K, which was pretty sick. So nice. So in the space of like under a year, me thinking, oh my god, like I'm in a black hole, like this is never going to end, to 6 months later, like obviously it kind of changed like rapidly, which was pretty nice really. So I guess
sorry, go on.
I guess it happening so quickly probably helped, but like equally like having the confirmation of being able like to go to like America and just being able to make decent money, like you can just see that like, yes, it might take me 2 years or 3 years, but I'm going to get out of it. But whereas if you can't get to it because of COVID, if you can't get to a certain place for like X amount of years or X amount of months, then playing basically online 100, 200 Zoom and then maybe 500 Zoom where you're not even sure you're beating. Yeah. Trying to get in out of a 6-figure hole, you're just like fucking out. Like, when's this gonna fucking end? And like you kind of feel. I mean, why do we leave work? Right. I mean, I'll ask you this question: why did you leave work?
I mean, it's for me. It was all about sort of like taking control of my life back, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So and freedom, right?
Yeah, freedom, making your own decisions, control of your own time, all of that kind of thing. They're the real drivers, as opposed to this like massive drive for money. You know, it's important, but it's not like the be all and end all. You know.
Yeah, and I said the worst feeling I had through kind of all of this is that you kind of feel like that you're an employee again. And the worst thing about that I struggled with is that like if I had kind of lost that money, and it was down to just me, like I just wasn't good enough, or I played games and I just didn't beat them, then this is probably, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I would have felt it's my responsibility. But then when you're trying to kind of like, when you've been hard done by a situation, and like you've played a game which you could never ever have won it, no matter what, and now you've got to kind of grind out that kind of hole. It just feels way different. It feels completely different, and that's just me being honest. Like it did, and that was tough. That was really, really tough, because then you feel like, slave's the wrong word, but like when you're obviously at work and when you have like a job and like there's somebody telling you what to do and stuff like that, you conform to kind of like limits and boundaries and rules, right? Then all of a sudden I'm basically, and all of a sudden I'm back in that kind of thing, and I'm like, in my head I'm like, do I want this where basically I have this life, or do I want to go back to work where I can have the same life but less stress? Because one thing people don't realize is that on Instagram and wherever we go, and you'll have it from your friends that, oh my God, it's amazing, you live like a great life, this is fantastic. But they don't see the hidden stresses.
Nope.
Like with anything, and they don't see it. And everybody will have like, little things that will make people notice that like you're not doing so well, or you've got some stress in your life. For me, if I go quiet, not on social media, if I go quiet with like family or friends or something like that, like, or like with my personal trainer, like 10 days later, he'll be like, or a couple of days later, he'll be like, Steve, I haven't heard of you for a few days, what's up? And usually it's just because I've got some like life stress with poker, like haven't been playing well, or stuff has been going bad, or whatever it is. So yeah, everyone has their own little kind of like hidden ways to deal with stuff. But nobody thinks you have it. Everyone thinks you just live a great life.
It's true. And did you remember this when we were in Vegas, when must have been about 2.5, 3 weeks in, and I was playing with Dan. I think it was at the Win or maybe the Aria, I can't remember. And I basically punted off like 7, 8K. And then I came back.
Aria, wasn't it? It was the flush.
Yeah, the flush. Yeah, that was. And honestly, that point was as low as I've like felt like in a fucking long time. And do you know what I mean? So like going through all that, and then like, being around you guys at that time is like that's so much better than just having to go through that like on your own. Do you know what I mean? Because I remember you're beating yourself up, but everyone's,
if you're on your own, you just stay in the gaff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas like we're like, oh, come down to the jacuzzi, we'll chill, we'll decompress and stuff like that. We'll talk about it. Like networking is super important in any walk of life. I think it is. And like in poker, I think it's like super important. For the simple reason is that like, firstly, you can learn just from like talking about spots, and secondly, like just not being on your own, because it's a very lonely game, right? Like I can be sat at a table with you and like we're like really close mates, but our end goal is like to make money, right? Like, and like, you have to be ruthless with that. Like, and like a lot of people can't. And like I love you to bits, mate. You're like one of my closest pals. But like if we're at a table together, we're at the table, same game. Like, I'm going to try and win, because that's just what. It's just at the end of the day, it's a professional sport. Like, and people don't see it as that, and like people don't like to see it as that. But it is a professional sport, and that comes down from like, it's not just from like studying and like implementation. It's from mindset. It's from everything, and like having that killer instinct in certain spots. Like, and that just comes across the board really. And I think it's weird talking about instincts as well, because just going back to that situation with the game, I knew at the first game I played, I knew it was wrong. I just knew it, but like I didn't trust it at the time. So like I'm pretty big on like trusting those instincts and stuff. Because they're there for a reason, right?
Well, it's funny, you've been a policeman, having those instincts. There could be something wrong here. But then whether you, for whatever reason, you suppress them or you don't listen, or maybe you get greedy, Moz, I don't know, but all these things you're battling with.
Yeah, I think it's more the fact of like the first person you blame when you lose at poker is yourself, right? You take responsibility. You're like, what could I have done differently? So when I was losing to this guy, who was essentially a recreational, and like I'm like, and some of the stuff that we saw, I'm just like, how am I losing to this guy? But then you tell yourself, oh, it's heads up. So there's huge variance in heads up. Like I could play against somebody who's I could play 10 times versus somebody who's never played before. I could still lose 8 out of 10 times. I could lose 10 out of 10 times. It's just huge variance in it. So like then you start questioning that. But like my first instinct, like I remember where we were playing, I was like looking on the table. I was looking if you could see stuff, like see my cards. Like I was looking for stuff. So the instinct was there. But at the time, I just didn't trust it. Or at the time, I wasn't kind of strong enough to kind of speak up about that. And just be like, look, kind of, I don't trust this, because again, like that's probably ego, because if I'm there saying, oh, look, guys, I don't trust this. Something's wrong. And then it's kind of like, oh, well, you're only saying that because you lost.
Yeah.
Like, what is it kind of thing? So it's a difficult kind of one. Again, it's a double-edged sword, I guess.
Yeah. That's super
But
interesting.
I guess it's kind of all. I mean, again, it's kind of probably all led to where I am today and the way I think about stuff, though. Learning to kind of like get by and kind of minimal money, and like I guess it touches on to kind of like if I spoke to some of my friends at home, they would assume to live the lifestyle that I live, you need to have infinite money. But I live this exact same lifestyle, earning less than what I was earning in the police at home, like each month. So you don't actually need that much money. Obviously, the difference is that I have like a means of income via kind of poker, but like there's no reason why people can't find those means of income. Like as recent as kind of like I think it was 6 months ago, I have a friend who left a job as a teacher at home, and she's living in Oz now, and she's just got a dream job working in a beach bar. Like,
Wow.
Yeah. Just like going, okay, I don't want to be conformed. The stress here, I'm going to go and maybe earn slightly less or same, or even if it is less, but just have a better quality of life. But people don't see that quality of life first. What they see first is kind of like structure, kind of like earning is like career. They're all so career driven because like I always describe like people in England, like they live for that kind of summer holiday. They live for that kind of 6-week holiday. But like, what are you doing? What are you doing for the 50 odd weeks a year, man? Like,
yeah, man, it's so true. But I think once you have grown out of that thinking, and that's how I describe it, it's something you grow out of. It's very hard to then sort of go back into that world where you just you get your 6 weeks holiday, whatever. Like keeping up with the Joneses, almost. It's that saying, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. And like I try and tell people so much about it, and everyone I speak to, like, but I don't know if you have it a bit similar. Like I have so many people, like I'll talk to some people and I'll try and change the kind of thought process on some stuff, and they'll go like, "Oh, it's easy for you," and you're like, "You got no idea." Like, yes, like I wouldn't even say it's easy. Like it's a super stressful kind of like way of life we've decided to take. But we've decided to like weigh those stresses up versus quality of life and gone, the quality of life is still better kind of thing. But by no means is it easy. Yes, we might work less hours. Yes, we might like not have like a structure as like you guys do. But like equally, you're not potentially losing thousands of dollars a day. Like but then the response is like, oh, you've got the $1,000 to lose though. And it's just like that's not what I'm trying to say here. And I don't it's not what we're trying to say, right? We're trying to say to you that like I mean people don't think the grass is always greener, and I agree the grass isn't always greener, but like no, everyone's scared to take that side, right? Like once they get like a career or once they kind of get some kind of set, they're like, oh well, I'm not too sure what's over there, so I don't want to touch it.
Yeah. But I think, that's like we're sort of arguing against like years of programming, like since school, university, like whatever it is. This is always what like we're sort of told to do. But in terms of sort of like your lifestyle then, outside of poker, obviously like you live in Thailand, like how does that look like? You said it's pretty easy. you said it's pretty easy, to live I guess a fulfilling life over there. I mean, what does your day look like? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends kind of where. So like basically like structure for the year, excuse me, would kind of be like I'd aim to spend like between 3 and 6 months in Vegas or in America. I think we've kind of found the sweet spot now. It's kind of probably been about 2 months each trip, because like I think aiming to grind like between say 180 and 250 hours a month, doing it for 3 months, you're not going to play your A game at all. And kind of like I've kind of changed my kind of process like over the last kind of 18 months, and we can touch on this obviously in some time basically. But I basically got a mental game coach called Karim. Can't say his surname, so don't ask me to say his surname. I basically got a mental game called Karim, and he's changed my whole perception on kind of poker. For so long, like I would just wake up at any time, or like for instance, I said to you today, are we doing this at like 3 p.m. my time or 4 p.m.? Like in the past, I'd be like, oh, he said 4 p.m., so I've got 20 minutes. I'll just grind online. Whereas like now I have like pre-session routines, pro-session routines. Everything's about performance and everything's about getting your mind in like that kind of like clean state to play, basically, and treating the game with a kind of respect. So kind of I've changed the kind of way I kind of see poker in terms of that now. But like when I was in so Vegas, for instance, now I'd only do 2-month trips. But my aim kind of over the next kind of like 12 months is probably just to spend at least the next 7 months in Phuket in Thailand. Just moved down here from Pattaya. Essentially was in Pattaya because there was some live games and stuff, but decided to come down here and just kind of really focus online. So day looks like generally try and go to bed kind of like midnight-ish, get up at 7, 8, between 7 and 9 a.m. In the morning, do pre-session routine, which can kind of like consist of kind of like cold shower, meditation, and then also some kind of like exercise, whether that be push-ups or tricep dips or the plank, whatever you want to do, like whatever you choose. So I do like a pre-session routine. Some days I'll go up to the pool and I'll just chill in the pool for like 10, 15 minutes. Again, it's just nice and cool just to wake yourself up. Come down and grind. Currently grinding like 200 Zoom on stars. So kind of like trying to aim to basically fulfill the rate back challenge and just game select, really, like more quality over quantity again.
Okay.
So we grind kind of online like 5-6 times a week, probably till like midday-ish. Then I will go and get some breakfast, and then go to the gym, and then pretty much have the rest of the day to myself, whether I choose to study, whether I choose to kind of like chill, or whether I choose to kind of like do other stuff, really. Not very good at studying though. I'm really bad at studying. I'm the guy that just plays usually. So like changing to study is kind of really tough. But like again, like everyone, my life here is like it's no different to what it would be in England. I just have kind of, I guess, better views basically. I have a beach that I can just walk down. I have like a nice lake that I can walk around in the evening. Like I'm pretty kind of focused on kind of trying to kind of get under like 90 kilo like over the next 6 or 7 months. So that'd be pretty cool if I could do that. But yeah, I would say perceptions have changed because for so long I just grinded for so long, and then all of a sudden in the space of 6 months I had like a mental game coach for a 12-week course, which was like the most expensive thing I've ever bought. And then now I have like a remote PT that does all my kind of like stuff online. And like Dan says to me all the time, he's like, "You've had him for 6 months now. Like, why are you still with him?" I'm like, I guess I'm paying for accountability because I weigh up of how much it costs each day and how much I'm basically paying each day for accountability, basically. And he's like, "Yeah, but like you're in Pattaya and you didn't do so well, so like that money was wasted, right?" And I was like, "But you said I didn't do that well in Pattaya, but I actually maintained weight. So like without Rory, I could have just fell off the scales, like kind of thing." So like I think basically making sure you have like a good network around people, and that includes investing in yourself in terms of mental game coaches, poker coaches if you want one, and kind of like PTs and stuff like that is really, really, really important. But yeah, I mean, it's not that exciting unless I go out on the weekend, and then it can get exciting.
Bit wild.
I'm really bad at saying no. Like, so like I follow, there's a club here called Illusion Phuket, and like it's like I think it's top 15 club in the world or something like this, and it's really cool. Like it's just good fun, right? But they have like different artists each week, and they keep posting on their Instagram what artists they have at what point, and I'm always like, oh, they look fun. Everything just always looks fun. But like I deliberately decided to stay like 40 minutes away from the place just because it makes it less accessible to me.
Yeah, fair enough. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, well, like it's very, very when obviously like because you're your own boss, right? So you have to hold your own accountability yourself, right? So it's kind of difficult because I found when I was living in Pattaya, I was living like a holiday basically. It just become a 3-month holiday. Well, like I was going out 3 or 4 times a week. I was trying to cram in the gym and poker around that. Whereas like actually what I want to do is live like a more normal lifestyle where like I have like set structures, set routines. Because firstly, you perform better. Secondly, your body enjoys it more and you just feel happier. And thirdly, like the nights out then become more fun. Like because it's not normal to go for out 4 or 5 times a week. It's just not normal.
Yeah.
It's like, so for me, like just like being able to look forward to something on a weekend or something like that just makes it more enjoyable for me.
No, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, if you do put in all of that good work in the week, and you do your pre-session routines, grind well, go to the gym, it is something to look forward to at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have to work hard because not everyone's an Olympian, right?
True. So, Moz, in terms of the future, then, so in terms of your vision over sort of like next 1 to 5 years, let's call it, how do you see that playing out? Stay in Thailand, move back home, stay in poker, out of poker? How's that all look?
I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. I was going to go home for Christmas, but it's quite expensive to get back to Thailand. So I can't kind of justify kind of spending that kind of amount of money on flights and stuff just for what is essentially a week or two period. I mean, it kind of sucks because it's Christmas and I love that time at home with family, but I saw my family in June, so it's not so bad. So the aim is to be basically in Thailand for at least kind of the next 6-7 months.
Okay.
So my visa runs out here on the 29th of November, but in between now and then, I'm going to look to get an education visa, start learning some Thai, which would be pretty cool. So basically that works out. It kind of gives us kind of like 3-month stamps and stuff like that. So
Okay.
it'd be pretty cool to kind of learn some Thai. But yeah, the aim is basically just to be here and grind online really, and just kind of try and, I think when I first left work, like my aim was to be the best. And then kind of when I had that kind of hardship, I was like, okay, I don't want to be the best anymore. I just want to basically live a life that kind of like I wanted to live when I left work, right?
Yeah.
And now I've kind of had that kind of like, I'm in the middle of kind of like both of those points now, whereas like I want to just have an enjoyable, comfortable lifestyle, but equally like I need to like plan for the future. So like I do have that drive to kind of like try and be as the best version of myself kind of be when it comes to poker. So like over the next kind of 6 to 7 months, I'm kind of hoping to kind of like move up stakes and stuff. A little bit of a pain because obviously Stars 500 Zoom doesn't run that often. 500 Zoom being $2, $5. And then the
How does
regs.
GG look in Thailand? Can you get money onto GG easily over there?
I haven't played on there to be honest with you to know, but I
Okay.
know that the higher stakes scene is better on GG, for instance. But
Yeah.
at the moment, like I'm pretty happy, kind of like just kind of like nailing the volume on kind of 200 Zoom, and then when I feel kind of ready and when I'm in a position to kind of like look for like bigger games and stuff, kind of look at that over the next 6 to 7 months, I guess. And then there will be kind of like an America trip within the kind of like next 6 to 12 months. But I want to be at a point where like um, I can just, because when I go there, I usually play 10-20 or 10-20, 10-20-40 or whatever it is. But I want to be in a position where like I can comfortably sit in most games within reason. Because the last trip I was there, so basically the trip that I went there when I won the 100K in World Series last year. So that would have been the November time actually, wouldn't it? When was the World Series? Because it was the
That's
Winter Series, wasn't it? It was the
October,
winter one.
November. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a year ago. Yeah, it was a year ago. Yeah, it's roughly about a year ago. So when I did well in that trip, obviously I got to a point where like, okay, now I still need to be staked for the games that I want to play, but I put a lot of pressure on the next trip because in my mind I wanted to like work kind of not being staked. So when we went earlier in the year, I probably didn't play as well, and I didn't kind of like take as many risks by playing like the 10-20 game. Whereas
Yeah.
now I want to get into a position where like I can comfortably kind of sit those games and not kind of like kind of stress about stuff really. So that's kind of really the goal before I want to go back to America over the next 7 to 8 months. Because I genuinely don't think I think as worth it as America is, I think a lot of people make a mistake of like going there when they're staked and kind of if you play 100 or 200 Zoom online and you're staked to play 510 or live poker at 510, it is not worth going to America. Expenses are way too high. And like if you're not playing the good 510 games, which Vegas doesn't seem to have that much, it's very hit and miss. I don't think it's
Yeah.
worth it. If you have 100% your own action, it's a completely different story.
Yeah.
But yeah, to be staked to play 510, I don't think it's worth it. I think you're better off kind of just staying in wherever you are and just playing 1-2 and playing online basically and hitting up live games if you can hit live games up really. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Sure. Good stuff, man. And I guess sort of like as a last point, what would your advice to anyone who's on the fence about doing something different with their life, leaving their job, moving countries, whatever it might be? what would be one piece of advice that you'd give them to just sort of help them get over the line and make that move?
I mean, if you can take a career break, take it. That's the first thing. Like, first thing you should always do is explore if you can take that option, because it's complete free roll. Like, even now, like, I'm 4.5 years into mine and I have the option to go back. Like, so I have the option to go back if I want to go back, basically. No, I'm 3.5 years into mine, sorry. But I have the option to go back if I want to. So, like, take a career break if you can do that. If not, the best advice is kind of like try and figure out what you really want out of life. There's a podcast that I mean, I know we spoke about it, Diary of a CEO. There's a podcast that kind of the PT does on there, James. I always forget his last name, and I know we've talked about this a little bit. He talks about firstly the difference between pleasure and happiness. Okay. And like people think they're getting pleasure by like living in their kind of like 9 to 5 jobs because they get their holiday, like in the kind of summer period. But like that's just like short-term pleasure of 2 weeks. Are you really actually happy? Or are you just gaining pleasure over that holiday? And another thing, like I think so many people who are successful or who do well are actually quite bored. And he talks about this as well. Like I'm not claiming to have said this. I've took this from him. And like, I would agree with that as well. And like a lot of people who are bored are actually kind of like pretty sad really and pretty depressed. So like I think people just really need to kind of figure out what they really want out of life. And like if you have an access to a skill or if you have an idea, then explore that idea. Like how many people say they're going to do a podcast or say they're going to do like a YouTube series and then they do it for like a month or 2 months and then all of a sudden they stop. Whereas like the people who are actually really, really successful actually just follow through with it. Yes, it's like a year or 2 years of like getting like sub 1,000 views on a video, but the growth is then exponential, right? So many people say they're going to do stuff and then don't do it. So like if you have an idea that you want to go for, I would just say do it. And my idea was like leaving White to do poker. It's a difficult kind of one to kind of, everything's subjective to that person, but don't be afraid to kind of take risks. And I think that would change more and more. Like the generation that we're in right now is taking those risks, I would say bit by bit. I then think like the generation below us will take more risks and the generation below us will take even more risks. Like I think it's going to massively change kind of thing. Like, like for instance, like without kind of going deep into kind of this, because again, I don't know too much about it, but like crypto, for instance, the generation below us and the generation below us were way more kind of open-minded to crypto than kind of our generation.
Yeah, definitely. But Moz, I think that's really well said, man. And I think we'll cut it there. I think that was really good.
Yeah. Feel like I waffled a little bit, but no.
But yeah, obviously we'll get you back on as well. Within the next 6 months to a year and see the progress, man.
We'll reverse it around as well, mate.
Yeah, we can do a reverse session too. That would be good.
Yeah, you can sit there and I can ask you some questions about kind of your journey because I think yours actually pretty interesting. We're pretty similar, right? But the one thing I would say is probably you took way more risk than me because you was in a super successful job that had a lot of structure and kind of like it was definitely a bigger decision for you than it was for me, for instance, because working in public services, for instance, it's not as well paid as, for instance, what you were doing. So that's I would say that's a lot more stressful making that kind of leap than it is for me, where I just had to kind of weigh up kind of the risk versus reward, I guess. But I guess you did the same, just on a bigger scale.
Yeah. The principle is still the same, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it'd be cool to hear your kind of side of it, to be fair.